One of the most ardent supporters of Fort Monroe National Park, and this is somebody I know you've heard from, is a Poquoson resident named Steve Cornelius. And Steve has devoted much of his life in recent years to a quest to see that Fort Monroe is cherished and preserved. Here's his take.
Fort Monroe is something to be cherished. It's not the same as Fort Eustis or Fort Story or any other military base. It's a special place. And the whole problem all along has been that the federal base closure law presumes that any base is just a sort of a base in a cornfield in Kansas, and it's nice if you give it to the city next door. And that's true for a base in a cornfield in Kansas. It's true for other bases. It is not true for a national treasure. And that's where our leaders have gone wrong in planning for the future of Fort Monroe. Why isn't it okay just to have a park at the north end and then let the rest of it, except for the moated fortress, be developed? Right. And the answer to that is that Fort Monroe in its entirety, and maybe it's better to call it Old Point Comfort, which is the name of the land on which the fortress, the moated fortress, is built. That entire place is intrinsically historic, going back 400 years. Luckily for us, nobody at Fort Monroe contemplates building casinos, but there is a parallel between some of what may still threaten Fort Monroe and the casinos that do still threaten Gettysburg. Often people assume, with some good reason, that if you're somebody who wants a national park, you might be a little bit of a sentimental tree hugger, disconnected from financial reality. But my group, Citizens for a Self-Sustaining Fort Monroe National Park, is actually composed of people from across the region who have been citizens here a long time in lots of different fields. We think that you should develop it in order to make it pay for itself, to save the taxpayers, but beyond that, development is inappropriate and unwise. Fort Monroe is a candidate to be a World Heritage Site, not just a national park site, because it has a special place not just in the history of America itself, but in the history of liberty itself. The first captive Africans stopped at Old Point Comfort in 1619, almost 400 years ago. The whole arc of the tragedy of American slavery can be seen at Fort Monroe, and they went to Fort Monroe to ask for freedom. When they did that, what they did, in my opinion, was affirm that our country was correct decades earlier to say that our founding principles are based on the belief that in every human heart there is a yearning for freedom and dignity. When we first began in this country to affirm that we really believed what was in the Declaration of Independence. That started at Fort Monroe. That requires more respect than the building of condos.